start?
I can start. Hi, it's Lori Hillis calling in from beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. Nice to see everyone.
Janet Harvey, Whidbey Island, Washington. Also gorgeous today. Sunshine, blue sky. Yeah, that's me too.
Well, this is Dee Dee Osborne in Colorado. I'm looking out at the mountains. It's another glorious day, clear down here. Good to see you.
I'm Kim Zobak. I live in Los Angeles, but I'm currently in Denver, Colorado this morning.
Hi, Kim.
I'm Danielle Debian. I'm calling from Montreal.
I'm calling in from Qatar.
Okay.
Sorry, we have Danielle from Montreal. Is it?
Yes, with a sunny day also.
Nice, nice.
Hey.
And then who else was speaking? Was it Marie?
Well, this is Catherine calling in from Durango, Colorado.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Catherine.
I'll try again. I'm not sure if you can hear me. My name's Marie Quigley. I'm calling in from Doha, Qatar, in the Middle East, and sun's just set here, so we've got a dark evening.
Oh, good evening. Nice to see you. Thanks for making the effort to get here. Who's next? Let's do a quick check-in.
Hi, this is Suk. I'm in India. I'm in Delhi in India. It's 8:30 in the evening. The sun is set, and we are looking forward to a lovely evening.
Nice. Nice to see you, Suk.
I'm Janet Shepard. I'm calling in from Cobble Hill, BC, just across the water from Lily. Nice to see you all.
Who else?
I'm Annie. I'm calling in from Minneapolis, Minnesota area.
Hi, Annie. Who hasn't checked in yet? Name and where you're calling in from would be lovely.
I am Teresa, and I am from New Jersey, originally from Peru. South America.
Thank you.
Thank you to you.
John Huber's calling in today from Portland, Oregon.
Portland today. Okay. I can't keep track of you.
Seattle yesterday, LA the day before.
Yeah, yeah. Who else?
Michael Cullen calling from Montreal.
Michael, nice to see you.
Hello, this is Tom from Boise, Idaho.
Boise, Idaho. Nice to see you, Tom.
It's Ronnie from Los Angeles.
Great. Nice to see you, Ronnie. Thanks. Anybody haven't checked in? All right. Well, we're going to get going because it's a full agenda. I want to welcome Eva. Eva is calling in from Rio de Janeiro. Is that correct? From Brazil, where she's based, and she is a global coach, MCC, ESIA, which is the supervisory designation from EMC, and a very accomplished supervisor, first one in South America. And she's here to talk with us about contracting and the importance of contracting. And we're going to do some work. We're also going to break out into small breakout groups as well during the session. So be prepared for that. It'll be done randomly. And Eva, if you have anything else you want to say in terms of introducing yourself, you're welcome to. Just to let you know, Damien is in Turin, Italy, and won't be joining us today. So this is being recorded as well, just to let you know. So Eva, over to you.
Thank you. So good to see so many familiar faces, and also to see faces that I don't know, of people I don't know. So this is really a very rich opportunity. Yeah, there's one thing I need to say. I have a dog who usually is pretty quiet, and it seems today he wants to take part in this conversation. So I'll need to close the door or let him in. I need to apologize for that. because my mic will need to be open, right? So I'm sorry for that. Bye-bye. So here we are. Sorry, that wasn't expected. It's usually so quiet.
My dog wants to be a part of it as well.
Okay. But yours seems to be quieter. Well, anyway, so this is a very interesting subject for me. And I think Teresa has seen many versions of this, because Damon usually asks me to do this presentation at the beginning of each program. And all of you who have been through Damien's program have seen a part of what we're going to talk. But every time I look at it, and I do it differently anyway, it's always different. Because if who you are is how you coach, who you are is how you supervise, who you are is how you contract, right? So every time I looked at contracting, I'm a different person. So there's new thinking around it, and new questions and new certainties. So what I'm going to share with you is my certainties as they stand today, and they will surely change tomorrow. So that's a disclaimer. And the other aspect that I'd like to share with you, this is my personal view about contracting. I don't mean it to be universal. I would just like to share it with you to prompt reflections, and then we can go to the breakout rooms and have a little discussion around that. So does that sound good? So share screen, let's see here. Can you see it? Good. So let's go. Just move this around. So you'll have the bibliography. We can share the slides with you later. And this is from a book that I'll mention later. The contract is the work. When I read this, I said, yeah, that's such a great sentence, because in coaching, the contract is the work. And as we see, not only with beginner coaches, sometimes with very experienced coaches, the contract seems to be treated as something that precedes coaching. And now we've finished contract, now we've finished with the logistical part, now we can go into the work. However, the contract is the work, as it is in coaching. And for me, in supervision, it's even more so. And this is an image that I found about a year ago, and that absolutely represents what's my view about what happens in supervision and how we need to contract for it. If we had time, I would just stop here and talk about this image, because I think it's so rich and we could really have some great discussions around it. But I will not do that. I will just share with you how I view it. So it's two hands holding something very gentle, very, with which we have to be very careful. We are peers talking to peers in supervision about our work, and shame and guilt are often there. Uncertainties of people who have built a persona, very successful. And I was just sharing with Lily before we opened the room that I just took a program of Theory U, applied to coaching. And the coach who's talking about prototyping, she herself is ashamed of when she makes mistakes during the program. And we were prototyping things. So, because we coaches should know better. That's what we seem to think. So supervision for me, if we get to the functions, as described by Hawkins, qualitative, developmental, and resourcing. The way I see it, it's the resourcing part that allows for the qualitative and developmental to be fully explored. So without the relationship, for me, there's no resourcing. And if we can't resource ourselves, we are not fully present to the possibilities of looking bravely, courageously to our developmental opportunities and to the qualitative aspects in all their nuances that are there. So that's my personal view. Again, I don't mean it to be a truth. So for me, I will not go into admin details here. This presentation is about contracting for psychological safety. How do we contract for psychological safety? And so many different styles. I've seen by now so many demos of different styles of contracting. And of course, as we become supervisors, the beginning of the journey is struggling to find out what's the difference between coaching and supervision. But as we learn what the difference is, or the differences are, we can develop our own style, and that's perfectly okay. Actually, that's what's expected from us. So that sentence, the contract is the work, I took it from this book. If you're interested, Supervision and Coaching, Hilary Cochrane and Trudy Newton. And in the page 18 of this book, they do a comparison table of purpose, focus, and there's another element, I think it's outcome, not sure, between coaching and mental coaching and supervision. And I find it interesting. So here, the purpose is to co-generate insights. So the red is created by me to stress what informs my view about contracting and supervision. So we start with a purpose. We are there to co-generate insights through guided, reflective inquiry. And so the reflection for me in itself is the objective of supervision. And that is important. Now, I will not read this. I will allow you to read these two quotes, which I find absolutely important to guide our conversation today. So how do we contract for relational nirvana? I'm not going to go through these. I just wanted to share with you how many times relationship is mentioned in the EMCC competency framework in contracting. And one of the things that they mention is that you can describe your philosophy, including your values and beliefs that inform your practice. So this is part of contracting. And if we go to the PCC markers and talk about ICF, the way contract is looked at, although if you go to the overall description of the of the competencies, it will be about relationship, but there's a lot of logistical aspects related to the relationship. And if we go to the markers, there is an emphasis on the outcome when we talk about coaching, and it has to be so. We have to be very clear about what is the outcome the client needs to reach. But when we talk about supervision, my view is that we are not focusing on the outcome. The focus is on the process of reflecting, on really being brave to go deeper and then deeper and then deeper, and finding out new layers of looking at whatever it is, because there's so many perspectives. Sometimes you get to the end of the session and you could still open up other possibilities of parallels that are there. So this is what informs my practice. I am not interested in the outcome. I don't ask for measures of success. Again, I don't mean to say it's wrong or that it shouldn't be done. This is just my view, because what I'm doing is the relationship. So again, the MCC competencies, the relationship awareness, understands and works with the multiple layers of relationships that exist in the process. And that's what I'm contracting for. So from the beginning, that's my focus. And we all know the model. Just to remind us that the words that are repeated are relationships and experience. So how do we experience, both of us, in the here and now, the relationships in the field, in the wider field? So this is, for me, what needs to be contracted, both for the engagement and for each session. So this is our raw material, in my view, what we are experiencing. And how do we contract for that? Especially with someone who has not been in supervision yet. I find it hard. Plus, we need to ensure that it is psychologically safe for both of us, because my sense is that as supervisors, we risk more than in coaching. We have to be more vulnerable to really explore what is out there, and that we may be picking up. And usually in coaching, I will listen to my intuition, but as long as I can make it some sense of it, and then I may or not choose to use it with a client and share it. But quite often I'll be cognitive and share what I'm noticing. And I heard you talking about this, and now you're saying this, and then I can offer it. But okay, sometimes I will go to intuition, and sometimes I might even listen to a somatic reaction. But in supervision, I will take the raw material, and sometimes it makes no sense at all. I don't know even sometimes how to name it, and still I will be brave enough to put it out there and be curious about it. So how do I ensure that I am, as supervisor, also safe to do that? And that I will not be interpreted as judgmental when I do that? Because for coaches, especially in the beginning level, when you're working with ACC coaches, for instance, it's different than MCC, because with ACC, sharing emotions, exploring emotions is not so common. And sometimes going to that place, they may say, oh, you're being judgmental. I learned in my coaching training program that we are not allowed to make interpretations or judgments, and not even to understand what you're trying to do. So this is, for me, the main point that we have to contract for, that we're both safe. And those of you who have taken part in Damien's program, you've read this, because this is my favorite quote. So the other element, apart from vulnerability, is the mutuality that takes place in supervision. I don't think we can forget that. And it's, again, there is a co-creation in coaching, but in supervision, it's deeper. And I find that word expresses better. It's more than just co-creating. There is a mutuality. There's no way, if you do the work, that you're not transformed as well in supervision as when you're supervisor. It's always magical for me, the way it goes. So I'm not sure we'll have the time for the third question. So the third question is just an invitation for you to think about it afterwards. If there's anything that you need to revisit today about your philosophy that informs your practice as supervisor. But what I would like to propose to the small groups is a discussion around the first two items. How to bring yourself when contracting, if who you are is how you supervise and how you contract. So both for the engagement and for the session, apart from all the admin aspects. And how to contract for vulnerability, risk, and mutuality. So what I'm interested in is, I've shared my view, and I'd love to enrich this with different colors. It's a different palette now that we can co-create here mutually. So that's and this is the end of my presentation, by the way. There are no more slides. So the rest is just co-generating. So Lily.
Okay. Shall we go into 4 groups? Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit a button in a minute, and you'll be automatically put into a breakout group. And we'll be looking at the first 2 questions. The questions will disappear because of the group. So if you need to write them down, please do so. I'll give you a minute to do that. And then how much time are we going to be offering them for conversation, Eva?
So let's make it 15 minutes, and then we'll have around 20 to debrief. Is that going to work?
Okay, so we have 50 minutes, and at the 50-minute mark, I'm going to hit a button, and your Zoom room will let you know that you'll have 1 minute to close your conversation, and then you'll be automatically put back into the big room. All right, are we ready to go? Questions or comments? All right, have a good discussion. I'll see you in 15. I'm going to stop sharing, okay, Eva?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's interesting. You and I are together still.
Yeah, I didn't join. I'm not going to join the room.
Well, yeah, this is interesting. Okay, so can you stop sharing for a minute?
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, last time I did this in another group, it put myself and the co-facilitator in a group as well.
Mm.
So I don't know what happens. So here we are.
It happens to me, and I just pressed
Nice. Yeah, I was remarking how quiet everyone was, and then we said, oh, wait until they get into their little groups.
That was really fun, Lily. I had never done that before, so that was really cool. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah, nice. Technology is amazing, huh?
Yes, it is.
It is.
And look at you, Lily, just knocking it out of the park. Awesome.
I know I'm going to be a techie freak soon. Not. Well, this time it was funny because in the past, all right, let's have a look. We're all back. Welcome back, everybody. Everyone's got a big smile on their face, so I'm making an assumption that things went well. I'm going to pass the baton back to Eva.
Thank you, Lily. So as you went to the rooms, Lily remarked how quiet the group was. I said, well, but I didn't ask them if they had questions because I was saving all the time for the discussion, and then we can have an open discussion. So, but I should have contracted that. So I'm curious to know, tell us, how do you bring yourself to supervision and when contracting? And how do you contract for risk, mutuality, and vulnerability? Who'd like to start?
Well, if you like, I'll get the ball rolling. Michael here in Montreal. Our discussion was rather lively in the sense that I'm very much a black and white person. So contracting is the benchmark and the cornerstone. So if having a formal agreement that clearly spells out expectations, roles, and responsibilities as a point of reference. That's not to say that it can change. Just like in coaching where the client says, listen, I don't want this to be the usual coaching session. I just need to be with you and to express what's going on, and so I can get some more awareness and insights. Well, I think that fits very much into supervision too, where the coach needs to have a place where they can feel safe, heard, listened to in the service of who they're becoming, both as a person and as a professional. So for me, it's a formal process, it's a formal engagement, and it's all in the service of continuous professional development with a learning outcome.
Okay, thank you. So Michael, I understand that's your view, and but not the group's. I mean, there are other people in the group who may have different approaches. Is that it?
That's correct, absolutely. And yeah, it was very different.
So if I hear correctly, your view is that everything is in writing, black and white.
It starts with the written agreement, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Who else?
This is John in Portland, and we talked a lot about the contract being a living document, even in coaching, and a malleable, changeable, fluid agreement. And to your point, to ensure safety in the environment, it's more of a mutual co-generated function than it is in a coaching contract, even though the coaching contract is a basis for ongoing dialogue as well. It's not something that's created and then sealed. It's something that's opened and kept open and kept as a foundational component of the dialogue, continuing dialogue between the supervisor and the supervisee. Mm-hmm. So that things that might impact the safety of the environment or the sense of safety and vulnerability are a continuous part of
mm-hmm.
the conversation.
Mm-hmm. And how do you contract for that?
Much in the same way that I was just describing, and some other members of my breakout room can contribute to that because we discussed it. It's part of the ongoing relationships, and as we know, relationships are fluid as well. So I'll let somebody else continue from there.
I'll chime in, and I just offer as a living example, I'm being pestered by a fly. So rather than have you all see me batting about, I'll have my video off. But I think it's an example of what Eva shared to begin with. Well, that's my dog, and I need to take care of that so that it is on the fly, so to speak, in the midst of a conversation.
That's a great example. Thank you.
That's a great example. We also talked about in our small group, we talked about how as supervisor in establishing the relationship in the contract to bring our own vulnerability and our own empathy and compassion to the relationship early. Share something that models what supervision is versus just talk about what it is. So
thank you.
Marie had a great analogy. I love her.
Mm. Can we hear that analogy? That would be one.
My analogy was about being in the arena, and when we're in the arena together, we've got to sort of take care of ourselves with these slings and arrows that might be hurting us or judging ourselves and others, and it's about going to the seats of compassion and self-care to support ourselves to have effective conversations. And my thought as somebody new to supervision, starting with Damien next month, is the contracting has already begun in my head and potentially in the head of my supervisee, we're processing it as we speak, as we think rather, and then it's about translating that as well.
Yeah, and the slings and arrows, that's a powerful. That's Shakespeare, right? The slings and arrows. Okay. But what I see in practice is that when coaches start supervision, they don't do what you're just mentioning. They do not bring their vulnerability. I supervise supervisors, and that's not what I see. Rather the opposite. So how do you do that? Actually, that's my question. How do you, so Tom just gave us a great example. I mean, or when we talk, we have our own slings and arrows. How do we talk about them? Because in practice, I do not see it happening. And maybe you have different experience, and I'd love to hear that. But I don't know, even Lily, when you supervise supervisors, do you see a lot of, let's look at I6. Do you see real I6 coming in, or just cognitive and say, oh, I had a similar experience and I know what you're talking about? What's your experience, Lily?
I think I6 is the toughest of all of the I's.
Yes, I agree with that.
And if we can get to I6, we can get some powerful learning happening. And so when I'm listening to recordings, I'm attuned to, is there any I6 happening? And when I'm supervising, and one thing I often, when I'm working with new supervisors, talk about is let's take a pause and let's scan ourselves. What's emerging for us? What's in our field? What are we aware of in terms of sensations, feelings? What's going on for us? That's the I6. Now let's say, does that make sense? And how do we interpret that in our work? Is it relevant to our work? Because almost always it's relevant to something. And so that awareness training is really, really important. And we're just as I think, what's the word? We're just as
susceptible.
Susceptible, thank you, Janet, to this as well, because we want to look good as supervisors. We want to come across as maybe experts even. We want to be able to say, hey, we are going to add value to this conversation. And the value is, can we stand in vulnerability together with our client? That's the question, I think.
Well, of course, that's one of the reasons it's always helpful to have our own therapeutic background, I suppose, and to be more aware of that. But when I was talking in the small group, and I had to think about what is my biggest vulnerability in this business, and I think it's that difference threshold, that when I find myself being very self-conscious and hesitant, and I look under that, I'm afraid of the person who I'm either intimidated by them or something. It's my own fear. I have no problem sharing that, but I would never do that in the first session, because I have learned not to go too deep, too fast. It's a developmental dance, right? That as we develop trust, we start sharing more and more different layers, and it may take time. On the other hand, you can have somebody in front of you who's used to going very, very deep very quickly, and you don't want to find yourself backing away from that just because you personally aren't comfortable with it. So that I6 thing, when I listen to supervisors in training, you're exactly right. They tend to talk about a reaction that they're having, but there's no Velcro underneath it. It's the way I think of it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dee.
Sure.
Yeah. It's more like checkbox approach. I have to show some I6 here.
Uh-huh.
And checkbox.
Eva, if I can just add one thing, the word that comes to my mind is performing. that often, especially in new relational settings, that awareness of I have to perform my knowledge here. I have to perform my skill, my awareness, whatever that is. And unless I can be aware of that in myself, it's a huge impediment to that vulnerability that you were asking about in mutuality and in question 2.
But that leads us to the point. If I cannot allow myself to be aware of that and use it from the beginning, and I'll come to cultural differences, Marilyn. There is even an example I'd like to share. But if I cannot share it from the beginning, then I don't think we're contracting truly from the beginning. Just one example, cultural differences. English is not my first language. So I'm a bit uncertain or insecure when I'm supervising in English. Although it's good enough for supervision, it's not my first language. And I may accidentally use the wrong word, especially in sharing something that may be happening to me, and it may sound judgmental, so I'll contract for that. If at any point I use the wrong word, tell me, correct me. It's not my intention, but it is a vulnerability for me. And this is my belief. From the day one, of course, we're building the relationship. But from day one, if we don't create the space, and I'm talking from here, the space here, for us to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we are not allowing our clients to be vulnerable to the extent they need to be for supervision really to happen. I think not only we model, it's more than that. We are putting energy into that field. So when we're contracting, who are we being? And that's why, Janet, your point of really working on this and bringing the self-awareness, who are we being and how we are contributing to that field. So I7 is not something that we're not contributing to. We are. And we also decode it. So I think it's such a deeper conversation, but I'd like to hear more.
Well, that makes me curious about just even asking the question in the contracting, how are you feeling right now during this contracting? What's coming up for you? And then perfect place for me to share what's coming up for me, either first or within that conversation, because I suspect there will be great ways of working in that vulnerability, bringing in that vulnerability right there as a great way to get started.
So that's first.
I'm noticing I'm getting nervous, or I'm noticing I'm trying to get this right, or I'm noticing I'm performing. To me, those would be great, real truths that could be going on in my head. Oh, I got a thumbs up.
Okay.
Now I'm all like, oh, thanks. No.
Now what? Sorry? Now
then I was like, oh, good. That was where my deference started showing up. But even to start bringing that in, like, oh, and now I feel good about that. Just those kinds of things that a fellow coach then can start to experience what supervision is in the contracting versus a heady over there when we start. Because we've already started. Contracting is this, we're starting supervision.
Yeah. I agree that there's a great distinction that must be maintained between the cognitive conversation and the heart conversation. However, I think there's a bit of a danger for us here, and that suddenly, I'll personalize this. There's a danger for me because I can get so excited and burrow so quickly and deeply into the mutuality of the conversation that to an outside observer, they may wonder who is the supervisor and who's the supervisee. It might become so much about me, which of course is a huge danger in coaching and something that the MCC markers are about. It's not about me. I'm following my client and I'm following my supervisee. And it's very I am vulnerable to making it more about me, far more about me as supervisor than it ever should be.
Well, that's interesting. And that's one of the questions that I had when I started. And the answer that I was given is whatever is in service of.
Mm-hmm.
So if you body scan yourself before you start, and suddenly you're feeling a very strong bodily reaction that you knew was not there, you offer it. Not as a certainty, but out of curiosity. This is what I'm feeling. And I wasn't feeling that way. I'm feeling unsure. I'm feeling suddenly that I have to have the right answers. Now I know I don't have to have the right answers. I've been a coach for so many years. Why should I? So why am I right now having this urge? If you think it might be useful, so it's not to pour it there, but what is a news, what might be useful to the supervisee, and then let him choose. But to hold back, for me, is not to allow supervision to happen.
Yeah.
Because then that coach is also probably holding back with their client and not sharing what is noticed and not having sharing sometimes what needs to be noticed. But I'd love to have, we still have 1 more minute or?
Well, let's take one last thought before we close the session. Anybody have something they'd like to share? I see Catherine said something about impact of pre-existing relationship. That's a whole day's discussion, Catherine. And it's in my space as well.
There was a question about cultural differences, and I think I would just say that my experience in Latin America has always been the openness, particularly working primarily with men, the openness to the emotional intimacy and the affection that is there is more accessible earlier than it is working with US groups, in my mind. And I think that's correlated with research on higher extroversion scores, higher affection scores, higher inclusion scores than business people in the United States. So it's a very comfortable place to be.
And I had written in the chat that the contracting, what you use as an example, Eva, in a culture where face is very important, they may not feel comfortable saying you've crossed over the line, and then, you know, exploring how would they let you know. It might be in silence. They might just be silent, or but you know, in cultures where face is very important, it might look different. And that's all I have to say. But thank you all so much. I've got
great notices. So thank you, Eva. That was I think a very rich discussion in the small groups and in this debrief as well. And just to let everyone know, Eva is going to be one of our facilitators at our next Coaching Supervision Conference in Montreal, June 13, 14. I get to meet you for the first time face-to-face there. How exciting. October 22nd is our next session. Same time, same room. Karen Prentice and Elaine Patterson from CSA. They teach in the CSA programs, will be with us. They do a lot of somatic work and heart work. So I'm going to be really curious to see what they're up to. They will also be at our conference in Montreal doing a half-day workshop. So we'll see you all October 22nd. Have a great month, everybody. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Thanks, Eva. See you soon.
Thanks everyone for your participation and contributions.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.